Change Will Do You Good. This is a sneak peek webinar. We'll get started in just one moment. We're going to give our attendees just one more minute to dial in. Please stand by. Thank you. If you're just joining us, you've dialed into the sneak peek webinar for A Change Will Do You Good. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for making time for us this afternoon. For the first time, the 2016 NAA Education Conference and Exposition will be held in beautiful San Francisco, and we cannot wait to make the city by the bay our home. We're certain that San Francisco's unique energy and welcoming spirit will infuse every aspect of the event, spurring networking and learning opportunities and making our gathering more worthwhile than ever before. We would love to have you join us and more than 9,200 apartment industry professionals in an exciting and collaborative environment. There you'll be able to gain inspiration and motivation from 3 general sessions featuring top-name keynote speakers, along with more than 50 education sessions. You can also discover the latest products and services at the NAA Exposition, with exhibits from more than 450 suppliers. The conference is a shocking 7 weeks away, but there's still plenty of time to register. You can find full details on registration, hotel accommodation, group pricing, and the full education program by visiting the conference website at the URL on your screen. And now, I would very much like to introduce you to today's speakers. Maitrey Johnson, Vice President of Multifamily at TransUnion, leads the multifamily vertical at TransUnion. Prior to that, Maitrey oversaw property management with Starwood Waypoint in single-family rentals after 13 years with Riverstone Residential Group as Executive Vice President. She's a former board member of NAA, a Vice President of NAAEI, and inducted as President of NAAEI. She has been past chair of NAA Lease Advisory Committee. Next on our roster is Susan Sherfield, who is the National Director of Education at Mersey Housing. She's responsible for developing and managing education for site employees and leadership and development for the corporate team. She's an active member of the NAA and NAAEI organizations. She's also an adjunct faculty member at Rio Salado College. She teaches CAM online for NAAEI and is a guest instructor at the University of Georgia. Last but not least is Stephanie Perrier-Helling, who will not be joining us on the webinar today. However, she will be joining the presentation team in San Francisco. I wanted to tell you just a little bit about her. She has 24 years in the industry. She's worked on various on-site, regional, and national positions and on various cross-functional teams, helping to facilitate organizational change. Stephanie volunteers at the state, local, and national levels, currently serving as the NAAEI President and on the NAAEI and NAA Board of Directors. Now I'm going to turn things over to Maitrey, who will help size up the challenge of managing change. Maitrey?
Thank you very much, Clark, and good afternoon, everyone. We are thrilled to have you all here on this session today, and very, very excited to have this as a sneak preview for our session at the June conference in beautiful San Francisco. We are here to talk briefly about change and change management, and what are some of the things that we can do to make change management initiatives successful. But before we do that, I'd like to go through and briefly introduce to you why change efforts often fail. You know, there is a saying that we all hear that the only constant in our lives is change, and we all can agree that that could not be more true. Yet with change being something that we deal with on a daily basis, both personally and professionally, it's so uncomfortable for many of us. The thought of breaking out of a normal routine is a very scary idea for some of us. It's so scary that only 54% of major change initiatives are successful, according to a recent survey of organizations by Katzenbach Center. And if you're not familiar with Katzenbach Center, Katzenbach is PricewaterhouseCoopers Center of Excellence in Organizational Culture, Leadership, and Motivation. So why do change efforts fail? In the interest of time, because this is a fast and furious agenda, I will not be able to go through all of these, so you'll have to come and see us in June at the conference. But I will go through two of the items here on our screens. Lack of leadership. It starts at the top. When leaders are not aligned and fully behind the change initiative, this dysfunction, as you can imagine, can create confusion all the way from the very top, and that disruption can have ripple effects through the entire organization. Some of you may have had those experiences in your own past. Another item, or another reason why change efforts can often fail, is when there's not enough clarity in purpose and focus. One of my favorite quotes, fail to plan, plan to fail. Planning is critical to a major change initiative. A key element of the planning effort is to establish what that purpose and focus of the change is, and then making sure that that is communicated across the entire organization. Failing to plan leaves the organization unprepared to act upon and operationalize the requirements for this change. So now that we have a view of why change efforts, or a brief view of why change efforts miss the mark, what can we do to accept change with a higher degree of tolerance and openness that sets you up for greater success? Let's go to the next slide and take a look at what the objectives of this session are. This session, as a sneak peek to the June conference program, will provide a brief introduction to what a change process should look like. We will provide you with some key takeaways on a change model, show you how to manage internal resistance, and finally, where the rubber meets the road, tools to help you think about change initiatives differently that you can go back and implement. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Susan.
Thank you, Maitri. So it's important to understand that change is external. That's really the situational part of it, and we're going to be looking at the elements that need to be considered in exploring the change itself. But where many organizations fail when implementing change is actually on the transition part of it, which is internal. And that's where we need to consider what are our employees going through in order to come to terms with the new situation. So when we look at the next slide, it gives a little breakdown of the different things that we need to consider for both change and transition. So first of all, change. That's the situation that we're actually trying to impact, where a change might be necessary. You know, what events are taking place in the company, or what events are really, taking place maybe in our industry or in our country that our company needs to respond to. The change will be focused on the outcome, and this whole process can go relatively quickly. The problem comes in is where organizations do not consider the transition process that the employees are going to go through. Let's face it, as adults, we don't like change. We get in our comfort zone, we know what to expect, we know how to deal with things the way they are, and we like to just stay in the status quo. And as Maitri said, we have to accept that change is all around us, and many times the changes that we experience in our industry or within our company is really more of a response to changes that are being forced upon us by things that are outside of our control. Say, whether it might be something that's tied to a federal regulation, whether it's a company making a choice to change something, or whether it's a response to a situation that requires change, it's still going to be change. And so in coming up with the title of our session, A Change Will Do You Good, I almost found a little humor in putting the words change and good in the same sentence. So it's really looking at the transition that becomes an equally important part of the change management process. And that's understanding, what are our employees going to experience? Psychologically, what are they going to go through? What is the process that we need to focus on to help them work through it? and understanding that depending on the nature of the change, that process may be gradual and slow. And trying to push through a change management process too quickly could ultimately mean that it's going to fail. So the next slide is going to show us the process of really focusing on the transition. And so as you see, this is really the transition process as part of the overall change management program, where when it first becomes known to employees that a change is pending, many people are going to go in denial. And, you know, in our industry, although it might be a change of a form or a change of a policy or a protocol, we also have to consider some of the big changes that happen in our industry, such as maybe a property is being sold. Maybe the whole company is being sold. Maybe a key member of the leadership staff is leaving an organization. And all of these different change situations can result in a great deal of anxiety for our employees. And so the first part of that transition involves denial, where they might just be in absolute denial of what the future may look like, and they refuse to accept and even start to consider what the transition period to the new normal is going to be. So as they go through denial, you see the personal mood and productivity actually drops into the pit. The pit is where they are in the worst emotional place they can be. And I think if for anybody who's been in business long enough, we can all think of a time where we were part of an organization that was where there was a major change pending that was going to directly impact us, and we got into the pit. And that is where it's the highest level of anxiety. It impacts productivity, and especially if it's the property manager or a regional manager, their attitude, their mood is going to impact all of the direct reports. So possibly a lot of team members are going to be influenced by their mood if they're in the pit. And so part of the change process or the transition process becomes, how do we help employees move through this change management cycle? And as you see, after the pit, it moves to, a top secret confidential next steps in helping people transition. And so you're going to have to come to our session in San Francisco in June in order to find out how you help people transition through this cycle and move out of the pit into the new way of being and a more positive personal mood and level of productivity. So as we finish considering the transition process for the individuals, you know, our colleague Stephanie is going to be talking about the 6-step change model. And this part of the change management process really focuses on all of the key steps that an organization needs to work through in order to both identify what needs to be changed and then develop what the new way of doing things looks like once the change has been fully implemented. So again, it starts with challenging the current state and just saying, where are we now, where do we need to be, or what do we need to be doing different in order to get there? The second step would be harmonize and align leadership. As Maitri had previously mentioned, one of the things that really contributes greatly to the reason why many change management efforts fail is if leadership is not on board. So we need to make sure that they are fully committed to whatever this change is going to be. And then the third step is to activate commitment. So one of the things Stephanie's going to be talking about in our session is, what does that look like in activating commitment? Who needs to be involved? How do you go about getting your employees committed to both working through the change as well, or developing the change, as well as implementing or rolling it out and working through it when it impacts our employees? And again, there are 3 additional steps in this change model, but we're going to keep them secret until June. So if we go to the next slide, please. Internal resistance is something that every organization needs to plan for. It's not going to be a question of if there is internal resistance. It is definitely going to be, where does it come from and how strong is the resistance? One of my favorite quotes is on the slide there: if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. so much of what's going to influence if a change management initiative is successful is the attitudes of the employees who are involved. And, we have to accept that, unless we are an entrepreneur, unless we own the business, we are always going to be subject to somebody else initiating changes that are going to impact us. And how successful the change is, how painful the change is going to be directly related to the attitudes that we bring to the organization in helping work through the change. So planning for resistance is going to be key to making sure our change management is successful. Our session, we're going to talk about change agents. Who are change agents? How do we identify them? And how do we use change agents in this process? We'll also talk about the learning function, and finally setting boundaries, which is going to be important for addressing people who may be very vocally resistant and may do everything in their power to really hinder the change process. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Susan. So since we are well ahead of time, I too will go ahead and share one little sneak peek on tools and techniques that you can take back and turn around a change initiative into a really successful change initiative. And as you've already heard me mention, the quote I stated, fail to plan so you plan to fail. Planning is absolutely the most critical component of effecting a change management situation in your companies. Having a thoughtful roadmap, having a thoughtful timeline, thinking through all of the impacts, engaging change agents, as you've just heard Susan talk about. These would all be components of creating an overarching plan on how you would go about initiating a change situation. Now, when I say that, it's also all relative to the size and scope of the change initiative. If it is the introduction of a new platform into your organization, let's say your leadership has decided to engage with a new supplier partner that brings in a new and better way of doing things for you. It's more efficient or has better ROI or better visibility into reporting, et cetera, whatever the benefit is. Let's say that decision has been made. Rather than just simply go forward with a rollout plan that's pretty more off the cuff, really having a thoughtful strategy. In my past, I have engaged in change committees, bringing together a cross-functional team of individuals across the organization with different departments. If the change is going to impact the IT department, having a representative from that IT department at the table. If it impacts HR, having an HR voice at the table. Having several on-site team members represented at the table. Creating a committee that really helps you think through all of the different aspects that you've heard about today and you'll hear about in the June conference, to really help set you and your company up for success when you go through that change initiative. So planning is a critical component of the change process. It's something where the more time you spend on the planning effort, the greater the success is going to be further down the road. The more voices you include who are impacted by the change, the greater, the more holistic view that you have, and the impact and resistance to the change becomes a lot lower. So that's a sneak peek in one of the areas of the tools and techniques that we will talk about at the June conference. So again, to echo what Clark has already said, if you have not registered for the conference, we encourage you to do so, and certainly when you're there, please come and see us on Thursday, June 16th from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. for A Change Will Do You Good, where we will share much more to set you up for success in embracing change and stepping out of that comfort zone. With that, I'll turn that over to Clark. See you all in San Francisco in June. Clark?
Maitrey and Susan, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule today to share a sneak peek of your session. We really, really appreciate it. I wanted to let everybody know that these experts represent just one panel in a lineup of 50 breakout sessions focused on multifamily housing operations. Be sure to register for the event using the link on the slide earlier in the presentation. If you don't worry about not being able to dial back on that, because after the webinar, we're going to send you all a link to a recording of the webinar. You'll receive it in a follow-up email. We look forward to seeing everybody in San Francisco. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you soon.